Gospel according to Luke, the 21st chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be, and what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and 'the time is near.' Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. For I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends. They will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Pastor Herb and I have been teaching confirmation in classes in Weimar together for the last few weeks. And these classes have really been fun, and they've been interesting. The kids know a lot about the Bible, and they know the small catechism as well, and they even know some history. Now, I love history. It was my favorite subject in school, and I still love it. And history is important. You probably know that old saying by Edmund Burke, "Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it." And that's mostly true. But sometimes even knowing history can't keep us from making those same mistakes over and over again. Well, before we started in at confirmation class on the 10 Commandments, I gave the kids a short history of the world just before the time of Martin Luther. Now, I started with the Great Famine of the 1300s. You know, life in Europe from the 1100s to the 1300s was pretty good. The weather or climate was great. Crops flourished, populations expanded. Life was very good. But in 1315, it all changed. The weather turned wet and cold. Seeds rotted in the fields. Animals starved, and finally, people starved. This was catastrophic. And Europe lost about 30 to 50% of its population to starvation. Think about that. 30 to 50% of the people died. And then came the Black Death in about 1350 to 1353. Plague then took a huge toll on a population already reeling and weak from the Great Famine. Again, anywhere from 30 to 60% of the population died. The loss of life was catastrophic. Whole families were wiped out, or maybe one person was left to carry on when their entire family died. Now, people looked to God and to the church for answers. And not all of the answers that they received were helpful. The church decided that this world was being punished because women were immoral. and they were caught in sin. As I said, not a very helpful stance to take. But the church itself was in a great amount of trouble because the priests were dying. Their mortality rate was well over 50%, and this left people without any spiritual help when they needed it the most. In fact, the church was sending out theology students with cheat sheets of services to care for people, and they hoped for the best. But the people, the ordinary people, kept their faith in God through all of this pain and suffering and death. It was a terrible time to live in, but this time passed. Those who lived through the plague emerged stronger. They were better off financially, and Europe prospered. Those who did survive were greatly affected by what had happened to them, and this led to a great new awakening of religious thought that eventually paved the way to Martin Luther and the other great Protestant reformers. In our gospel reading for today, Jesus is speaking to his disciples about the impermanent things of this world and how, after he is gone, false prophets will arise and try to lead people astray, and how they will cry out, "The end is near," and Jesus warns his prophets not to follow them. He speaks of wars and earthquakes, plagues and famines, and how these will be dreadful omens and portents. But Jesus also speaks about he and his followers will be persecuted and betrayed. And Jesus tells them not to prepare a defense now, because he will give them the words they need when the time comes. And Jesus promises them that they will all be saved. Jesus is telling them that bad things are going to happen to the world and to them, but that in the end they will prevail. There was a woman living in England in the mid-1350s. Her name was Julian of Norwich. I guess we would call her a nun today. She was a theologian and she was a great thinker. And when I was reading our gospel message today, well, when I sat down last week to think about it, what went through my mind was a great saying of Julian of Norwich's: "All will be well. All will be well. All manner of things will be well." Now, she lived through some of those very hard times in England, but she and her society came out of the hardships they faced stronger than ever. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we all live in trying times. Plagues, famines, droughts, floods, wars. A lot of stuff happens to us and around us, and we somehow keep going through all of it to the other side. When you're living in the midst of a crisis, it is hard to see clearly. It's hard to find your way through. It's hard to keep your balance, and it is precisely then that we need God and our faith the most. Those people who suffered famine and plague in the 1300s and 1400s did not lose their faith. People were dying all around them. Everything they knew and trusted was falling apart. And still they emerged stronger in faith, and they emerged with a greater appreciation of what life means, of what life and the kingdom of God can be, and that we can get through almost anything with our faith. There have been many times of trial in the life of our planet. Many wars, famines, floods, religious wars, and just plain insanity. We might think that we are burdened with more problems than we can ever solve. But this is just life happening. God has not abandoned us. The end of the world is not near. All this is just a hiccup in the vast scheme of things. We should never forget that our time is not God's time. God has literally all the time in the world, and God will not cut us down before our time. In our psalm today, the psalmist sings to, "Sing a new song to the Lord who has done marvelous things, whose right hand and holy arm have won the victory. Shout with joy to the Lord, all you lands. Lift up your voice, rejoice, and sing. This is the life that our God has created for us. A good life, rich and full of joy as well as heartbreak. A life full of living life to the fullest. We are all of us living on God's time. We can never know the future, but that's okay. We're not supposed to know what the future holds in store for us. Now, we will be talking with our confirmation kids about the Lord's Prayer soon, and especially about what it means when we ask, "Give us this day our daily bread," and how this means that God will give us everything we need according to God's will, not our own. God's will, God's time, God's continuing gift of grace to us, God's beloved children. Jesus tells his disciples that bad things are going to happen, but they should not be afraid. That is the good news in today's gospel message. Don't be afraid. All will be well. All will be well. All manner of things will be well. Thanks be to God.